Jay の英語スキルブースター。こんにちは。Jay こと早川浩二です。
こんにちは。アシスタントのあきです。この番組は旅行や仕事で英語を使えるようになりたい方、TOEIC などの資格試験の勉強をしている方、英語学習へのモチベーションを高めたい方にスキルアップのコツをお伝えしていく番組です。Jay さん、今回もよろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。今回はロバート・ヒルキ先生へのインタビュー後編です。前回は TOEIC についてのお話を伺いましたけれども、今回はヒルキ先生のもう一つの専門、異文化コミュニケーションについてお話を伺いました。外国人の方と仕事をすることに興味がある方、もしくはもうすでに一緒に仕事されている方には参考になる情報がたくさんあります。それではインタビューをお聞きください。
Last week we talked about TOEIC mainly, and this week I'd like to ask you about intercultural communication. For TOEIC learners, Robert is the god of TOEIC industry, but you have other expertise in intercultural communication. Is this your main field?
Yeah, actually, yes, it is. I have been doing intercultural communication in Japan for close to 40 years. I first became interested in intercultural communication many, many years ago when I was in the United States Army. You may be surprised by this comment, Jay, but actually the most progressive social institution in the United States is the United States Army in many ways. And the reason is because it's military, right? So it's really top down.
Right.
So you don't have any choice. You have to say, yes, sir. You just have to follow what is told. So when the Army in the 1970s was very, very active in trying to promote diversity training, we didn't call it diversity training at that time, but that's what it was. And I became a trainer to try to help people from different backgrounds understand each other, particularly European Americans and African Americans and Latin Americans and so forth, right? So that was the primary focus at that time. And that was my kind of introduction to Ibunka communication. And then when I came to Japan, I thought, okay, I lived in Germany for several years. My DNA is 100% German. So, and I also was a trainer in those kind of cultural communications classes in the Army when I was in the Army. So I thought, I understand intercultural communication. But when I came to Japan, there were so many things that happened that I could not understand. Wow, what's going on here? And so that was the kind of spark for me to really devote most of my career towards intercultural communication. Now, of course, when I was teaching at the university, my main focus was in English language education and especially critical thinking, helping people to be able to think critically. But at the same time, the field of intercultural communication was starting to become interesting to companies.
When did it become important, and how did people realize the importance of intercultural communication?
If we went back 40 years ago, people were not at all interested in intercultural communication. They didn't understand what the purpose was, and especially they thought, it's kind of an interesting way to spend 1 or 2 days in the classroom, but does it really relate to business? Does it really help people to do their jobs better? That was the question that we had at that time. But around the year 2000, which is just about the year that I left the university to focus on intercultural communications training and also on TOEIC as well. But there was a really big shift. It was a kind of, I'm trying to think how to say bunkiten in English, a kind of almost a kind of big juncture where people started to recognize that intercultural communication really did have an impact on financial the bottom line, right? Finally on profit, because if people could not do their job 100% at the same level that they could, for example, in Japan, that's a huge business cost, right?
Right.
If somebody goes overseas and can't communicate with local people effectively, you don't have good communication. You can't maximize profit for your organization because you feel a lot of frustration, and the other people feel frustration, and you can't display your full skills, and you can't maximize the output for your team. And ultimately, then that impacts on the bottom line for the company. So people have started to recognize that. So that's one reason in 2000, I shouldn't say the name of the company, but it's a big automotive company in Aichi Prefecture, became our customer. And that once they became our customer, a lot of other companies started to recognize the value. So now my main focus is absolutely intercultural communication. Probably about 20 days per month, I'm
20
delivering
days
seminars.
per month?
Yeah.
Oh, so almost every day.
It's almost every available working day. Yeah.
So, but I think we all know the understanding other cultures is important, but is it possible to teach it? Or do you think we need to apply something to the specific situations or like practice?
It's a combination of both. It's a very good question, Jay. It's a combination of both. Of course, you can do it experientially. In other words, just trying to put yourself in the situation and trying to figure it out by yourself. Ultimately, that's what I did when I came to Japan, because I didn't have any kind of roadmap that helped me understand Japan. So I had to kind of create the roadmap by myself. And in fact, we call the frameworks that we teach, we call them maps.
Maps.
Because maps are a navigational tool, right? If you think about a real map, if you go someplace that you've never been before and you have no map, it's very easy to get lost. But if you do have a map, then you can kind of make a plan how to navigate to your destination in the most efficient and effective way, right? And intercultural communication is really the same thing. If you have some kind of frameworks about business practice, for example, like last week we talked about participating in business meetings. If we think about one end of the scale is you go to the business meeting and your job is to listen carefully to what other people say and don't interrupt and look for the timing, and you try to think, should I say it now? Should I wait until later? Or maybe I'll talk to Tanaka senpai after the meeting. That's a kind of one mindset. But on the other hand, as I mentioned, Robert's mindset when I came to Japan many years ago was the reason you go to the business meeting is to say your idea and challenge other people's ideas and have people challenge your ideas. So if you imagine that as a kind of a map, and imagine it's a kind of a scale, a kind of a 1 to 10 scale. If you have those frameworks and you understand those frameworks first, it helps you to focus your experience. So it's a combination of the experiential learning, but also having a kind of framework to help you interpret, a kind of a lens to help focus your experience. So in our way of looking at it, the best way to combine the two is first you learn the maps, and then you apply the maps to your own experience to help to interpret it better. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. So Robert, well, for example, when we do the muscle training, it's better to build up bigger muscles first to feel the difference and feel the confidence. What are the big muscles or the biggest muscles in intercultural communication?
Yeah, that's a really another very good question. If I come back to the idea of maps, and I think that there are several, of course, that are really important, but the first one is something that we call rugby and golf. Okay, that applies to how you participate in a business meeting, because metaphorically speaking, typical as a tendency, because the world's not black and white as we talked about before. But if we just look at the kind of extreme points, intentionally look at the extreme points, then we should be able to cover the other behaviors which are between those extreme points, right? So if one extreme point is golf is very, very respectful sport, right? You respect other people's turns. You don't interrupt other people. You wait until they finish saying what they're saying, and then you think about the timing for your own comment, right? Okay, so if that's golf, okay, and then the other end of the scale is typical to kind of Robert when he was Namagaijin, many, many years ago, didn't know anything about Japan at all, coming to the meeting and expecting that it was normal to say your idea, in the meeting, and normal to challenge other people's ideas in the meeting, because for the rugby, in other words, Robert's way of thinking, a person and a person's idea are separate, right? You're not attacking the person, you're just attacking the idea.
Right.
Okay, and that's something that we've learned in our education system from a very early age. So if your mindset is rugby and you go into a golf situation, you can be really, really frustrated in that situation, right? Because other people think you're kind of urusai and koi ga dekai, right? And kind of KY, you're not reading the situation. But at the other end of the scale, like from Robert 40 some years ago, I felt like, wait, don't you have any opinion? Why are you here? It's you're getting a salary, right? You're being a kind of thief of the organization's resources by not contributing your ideas in the meeting, right? So that's the most important muscle that needs to be trained, I think, for Japanese members, is to train the kind of rugby muscles.
Right.
Okay. How to be able to show your real ability. Because what, ironically, and it's really sad, but what happens is that rugby players usually have no idea that golf even exists as a way of communicating information. And so if somebody comes into a meeting and tries to play golf by basically listening quietly and not interrupting and not joining the discussion assertively, people think they have no motivation, or they're not interested in the topic, or the worst interpretation is they have no ability. Because if they have ability, then they would say their idea, of course, right? Because the reason they're in the meeting is to share their idea. If they don't share their idea, it means they don't have any idea.
Yeah.
And if they don't have any idea, it's probably because they don't have any ability. It's interesting. I was doing a training session earlier this year. I won't say the name of the company, but it's a science-based company. So there were researchers. It's a team that was based partly in Germany, partly in the United States, partly in Japan. So half of the researchers were Japanese, half of the researchers were European. And when we were talking about rugby and golf, one of the Japanese researchers asked, okay, can I just ask a question for my German colleagues? If let's imagine someone has just graduated from graduate school, has just joined the company. Okay, in other words, shinyushain. Is it okay for that person to contribute in the meeting? I mean, she doesn't really have any background yet. Is it okay for her to say her idea? And the Germans said, yeah, shinyushain dakara koso. Precisely because she's a first-year employee, she has to contribute her idea.
Oh, she has to.
Otherwise, we cannot evaluate her contribution if she doesn't say anything. So developing those rugby muscles, not because rugby is better than golf. That's not the point. It's not that rugby is better than golf or golf is better than rugby. It's just that really a global business person needs to be able to control the whole scale. So for our Japanese colleagues, they already know how to play golf very successfully, right? So we don't need to teach them how to play golf, but we do need to help them to develop those rugby muscles.
Exactly.
The second most important map and muscle that needs to be developed is something that we call context, high context and low context. That's probably familiar to many of our listeners, Jay, because it's probably the most well-known of the intercultural maps. Basically, if I summarize it, ichi o kite nani o shiru. So for Japan, you hear one, understand 10,
Yeah.
Because you read between the lines or read the situation or you share background information. So it's not always necessary to say everything directly. But if you come from, for example, the United States or from Canada, Australia, or especially Germany, right? You hear one, you understand one. If you want me to understand 10, you got to tell me 10. Because in order to avoid any potential misunderstanding, we put it into words. We say it very clearly. Kids who grow up in that kind of low context environment, like Germany, for example, the United States, were taught from a very early age to look at the situation and choose the words that most appropriately fit that situation. So the word equals the message, and the message equals the word. Right? You say what you mean what you say. Yes means yes, no means no. So it's very difficult to misunderstand. But many times Japanese, even if their English is quite good, they're not always so comfortable to say everything so directly because it feels kind of kudoi. The other person's not stupid. Why do I have to say that much? Right? But actually for low context, it's very helpful if you say everything very directly because you minimize the possibility of a misunderstanding. So those are the two main muscles, the rugby muscle and the low context muscle that need to be developed.
Well, I just thought that what Japanese, the message is positive but meaning negative. Like, well, let me think about it. 考えます means no.
But you know what? That kind of idea of let me think about it is actually a very good way of maintaining relationships, isn't it?
That's right.
Because think about it in Japan. I mean, sometimes your customer asks you to do something which is absolutely impossible. Like they want the delivery of the product this week on Friday, but it's going to take another month and you cannot do it. So you have to refuse. If you use that kind of indirect high context style, you don't have to say no directly, but the other person can get the message of no.
Yeah.
It's a very good way. Like, 前処します。前向きに検討させていただきます。関連部署と連絡いたします。持ち帰らせていただきます。I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can say no without having to say no directly. But for people who come from a low context point of view, a low context background, actually saying no directly is polite because I'm not happy that you say no, but at least I'm not confused.
Right.
See, so that's a real big difference in perception.
So it seems like a paradox a little. We need to be direct to be polite.
It's usually very, very helpful. But at the same time, when we work with non-Japanese clients, we try to help them understand the need to develop a kind of antenna so that they can start to kind of read the air. But, you think about it in Japan, how long did it take you as a Japanese to develop that kind of sensitive, high context antenna? It takes a long time, right? And it's supported by the education, right? I mean, for us, like in education, okay, let's imagine a typical U.S. American, okay? 9 years old, third grade student, we start to write lots of mini essays, okay? The topic is really simple. Like, pizza is more delicious than hamburgers. Cats are better than dogs, whatever. But what's interesting is the teacher's way of grading the paper. The teacher points out the spelling mistake or the grammar mistake or the vocabulary choice mistake, of course. But more than that, the teacher is writing, this is not clear. What are you trying to say? Where are the logical connections? Where are the setsuzokushi to connect these ideas together? So if you write like this, people will not understand you. Make it more clear. In other words, what's your point? And we're hit with this big stick. What's your point? What's your point? Say it clearly. What's your point? But if you think about in Japan, think about your own educational system, especially kokugo no jugyo, right? The teacher passes out some kind of essay, right, to everybody and then says, じゃあ皆さん、この筆者は何が伝えたい？一緒に解釈してみましょう。よくあったでしょ? And so what happens then is people are actually trained to read between the lines. And every high context culture like Korea or Indonesia or Vietnam or Thailand, for example, of course Japan, China as well, they have the same activity in school to teach people how to read between the lines. I mean, even the National University Entrance Examination, Sentashken, there's one part about reading between the lines, right? So of course, we need to train the non-Japanese people to be more sensitive, but it's probably easier for a high context person to, in a sense, move down the scale to be more direct than it is for a low context person to suddenly sprout or develop that antenna, right?
Well, it's really interesting and fun to learn new things about difference in culture. And I'm sure you have a lot more to teach. Do you have any plan to do some TOEIC seminars or intercultural communication seminars to public?
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I have my own small company that I run, and my wife is actually my keikaku bucho. She's the head of the planning department, and she's been trying to encourage me to do this. However, right now, our company is so busy right now. We had a lull because of COVID, you can imagine. So suddenly in 2020, it was like the plug was pulled from the wall. Suddenly we had no seminars at all. All of our customers canceled their seminars. But as we've developed the skill of presenting our content online, the customers have come back. In fact, come back even more. So we are even busier than before delivering the online training. So, I'm really busy. I'd like to do it, and I think it would be a good idea in the future. So maybe Jay, maybe you can support me. Maybe I can.
Yeah, sure.
Because you have lots of experience doing these kind of seminars, so maybe I can tap into your knowledge and to be able to do it. It's a really good idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea, and I'm looking forward to working with you again soon.
Yeah, as the same for me too as well.
Thank you, Robert. Well, thank you for the time. It's really precious information, both in TOEIC and on intercultural communication.
Sure, anytime, Jay.
Thank you.
Okay, it was really a pleasure talking to you. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Useful expressions.
続いては英語の名言から学ぶお役立ち表現をご紹介いただきます。Jay さん、今回の名言は何でしょうか？
はい、今回はウォーレン・ベニス、ウォーレン・ベニスという人の言葉です。Leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. Leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. 日本語がリーダーシップとはビジョンを現実に転換できる能力である。リーダー、ビジョンを持つのは大事ですけどね、それをいかに実現させていくか。これがリーダーシップということですけれども、今日はですね、この表現の中から translate vision into reality。ここで translate A into B。A を B に転換するっていう意味にもなりますし、翻訳するっていう意味にもなりますよね。
そうですね。やっぱり職業柄翻訳するっていう意味でパッと思い浮かべちゃいましたね、やっぱり。はい
ですよね。例えば translate English into Japanese って言えば英語を日本語に変えると、翻訳するという感じで、最初の方を into 後ろの方に翻訳するという感じですよね。そうですね。
これ into とうまく一緒に使うので、何でしょうか、どこからかどこからみたいな、どこからどこからみたいな移動を感じさせますよね、やっぱり。
そうですね。で、結構表現覚えるときって、例えば今のであれば translate A into B とか provide A with B とか A と B でなんか数学みたいな感じで置き換えることって多いと思うんですけど、これ A、B じゃなくて実際の単語を入れた方がいいですよね。 なぜかというと、どっちがどっちなのかって分かんなくなってしまうので。
確かにそうですね。そういった意味ではやっぱりちょっと簡単な自分で分かりやすそうなさっきの Translate Japanese into English みたいなものを当てはめて覚えておくといいですよね。
そうですね。はい。その方がいいですね。Provide A with B も A と B に何が入るかってやっぱ分からないと。
確かにそうですね。ちょっとこんがらがるかも。
provide you with the information なのか、provide information with you なのかっていうのは、A と B だと分かんないですもんね。
確かに本当そうですね。
ちなみに provide you with the information ですけどね。はい。
でも確かにその単語一つだけじゃなくて、後ろのその provide だったら with を一緒に覚えるとか、translate だったら into も一緒に覚えるとか、そのちょっとした塊で覚えるっていうのは使いやすいですよね、そっちの方が。
そうですね。で、それが口に馴染んでくると、それこそ Thank you very much みたいな感じで考えずに言えるようになりますもんね。
はいはい。単体で覚えるよりもやっぱりちょっとした塊でフレーズで覚えた方がいいですね、やっぱり。
そうですね。はい。そういう意味ではこういう名言とかっていうのは意味からの学びもたくさんありますけども、文法とか構文からの学びっていうのもたくさんあるので、こういうのを使って学習するっていうのはすごくおすすめですよね。
いいかもしれないです。記憶にも残りやすそうですね。この一文だけでもちょっとインパクトあるので。
ですね。何よりでも僕がインパクトあったのは先週の表現、アキさんの名言ですよね。
まだ言ってるんですか？
You never know unless you start これはしばらくは僕は忘れないと思いますし、リスナーの方も皆さん結構メモされてる方も結構いらっしゃると思うんですよ。
いやよかったです、言ってみて。じゃあ
ありがとうございます。またいろんな名言聞かせてください。
お願いします。第84回をお送りしました。J さん、
はい、
夏休みは大学での集中講座もあるそうなんですが。
そうですね、もう8月も後半に入りますけども、実はこの8月の最後末から9月の頭まで、30時間の集中講座というのを担当します。
30時間 ?1 日何時間なんですか
？1日5時間ぐらいじゃないですかね。
オンラインでしょうか？
これがですね、対面なんですね。
なかなか貴重ですね、じゃあ。
なかなか貴重な対面でやります。
そうですか。5時間。これは TOEIC とか。
TOEIC ですね。TOEIC のスコアを上げるということで、これ大学としても初の試み。
ちょっとインテンシブなのは初めてっていうことですね。
そうですね。ということで、運営される側もどうなるかわからないというところでご依頼いただけたんですけども、しっかりと結果出るような感じで、これもう学生の皆さんも大学生の皆さんもですね、せっかく出るのであればやっぱり結果出したいという思いで参加されていると思うので、そこは期待に応えるだけじゃなくて、期待以上のものを提供できたらいいなっていうふうに思いますし、やっぱり本当にこういう集中できる時期っていうのはやっぱこの夏休みだからこそっていう部分もありますもんね。
授業もお休みですしね。
そうですね。
この講座だけに集中できるっていうのはすごくいい機会ですよね。
ですね。で、こういう集中講座の良さって何かっていうと、例えば、運転免許なんかでもそうだと思うんですけど、短期集中でやることによってやっぱ慣れるんですよね。
慣れ。なるほど。
あと型を身につけるっていうのはやっぱりこれだけやっぱ集中してやらないと型にはならないですよね。なぜかというと反復いっぱいできますからね。
確かに記憶が鮮明なうちにまたそれをすり込むことになりますもんね。
そうなんですよね。でそれって知識入れて忘れちゃったじゃなくて、知識入れた上でそれをすぐにスキルに変えることができるので、これがやっぱり時間がこれだけ取れることの良さですよね。
いやー、でもちょっと体力的に大変ですね。
大変なんですよ。これはいつが大変かというと、1日目じゃなくて3日目なんですよね。大体もう3日目、僕もこういう集中講座長年担当してきましたけど、5日間の集中講座の場合は3日目が一番大変です。
それはどういうことで、やっぱり中だるみっていうことですか？
たるんでるわけじゃないと思うんですけど、やっぱもう疲れですよね。1日目は新鮮ですよね。
そうですね。
で2日目まだ気合が入ってるので、よし今日も頑張るぞっていうのでやりますよね。 で、1日目、2日目で詰め込みがありますので、
はい。
で3日目でだいたい、あれっていうのが来
あと
る感じ。
2日ですもんね。3日目だとあと2日あるってちょっとやっぱりまだあるぞっていうとこですもんね。
そうですね。この真ん中が一番辛いんですけども、ただここを乗り越えれば、ラーナーズハイみたいな状態になるので、そして5日目終えて、そしてまたそこから今度は自己学習の力をつけていくっていう感じですかね。
5日間連続なんですね。
連続ですね。5日、6日ですかね。5時間かける6とかですかね。
いやー、本当にちょっと体力勝負ですね。受ける側もやる側も、
まあそうですね。まあ途中で土日挟むので、そこでちょっと、
はいはい、
まあこれを休憩に当てるのか、それとも自主トレに当てるのかによってまた大きく変わってくるかなとは思いますけどね。
でも夏休みだからこそできることですよね、本当に。
間違いなく本当そうですね。ぜひこの前回の名言にありましたけどね、好きではない限り成功できないということありましたけども、まあ、もし英語苦手で参加されている方いらっしゃった場合には、まあ、何人かいると思うんですけどね、まあ、この集中講座であれ英語面白いかもしれないってちょっとでも思ってもらえたら、もうちょっと本当に1ミリだけでも面白いなって思ったらそこから開いていきますからね。
そうですね、
その1ミリが2ミリになって4ミリになって8ミリになってみたいな感じでずっといくと思いますので、
はい
はい、でその好き、これだと自分でもできるっていう思いがまたスコアに反映されますからね。
いやー、Jay さんの講座はもう受けたら楽しくなること間違いないと思うんで、受けられる学生さん楽しみですね。
楽しんでくれるといいんですけどね。
間違いないと思います、
僕は楽しみます、
はい、
僕は楽しまない限りやっぱりそれは伝わらないですからね。
はいはい
はい、楽しい講座に、まあ楽しいだけじゃなくてやっぱり結果に出る講座になればいいなっていうのは思いながら、はい、今週末からやっていきます。
はい。さて、この番組ではリクエストやご感想をお待ちしています。メッセージはツイッターやメールなどでお気軽にお送りください。また、毎日配信の単語メール、ボキャブラリーブースターの購読もおすすめです。Jay さん、今週もありがとうございました。
どうもありがとうございました。Okay, thank you for listening. See you next week.